In this video we are looking at the Alcatel One Touch Popstar LTE2, probably the longest name so far from Straight Talk. Now this is a 4G LTE phone and you will need the AT&T coverage area to activate it. Now the one highlight on this phone I will say, or the main highlight for this phone I should say, is the fact that this phone retails for $79.99. So I think it is around right at, if not the lowest priced 4G LTE phone available from Straight Talk. Now the specs on this are 4-inch touchscreen, Android 4.4. Don't be fooled by those buttons. I initially thought this was Android 5.0, but it's not. 1.2 quad core processor, 5 megapixel main camera, 0.3 megapixel front facing camera, and it does have an LED flash. So other than the price, as I mentioned at the start, another highlight of this phone for me anyway is the fact that it is a very compact phone, and those are hard to find, particularly when you're looking for an LTE phone, because most of those phones are large, 5-inch plus screen devices, 4.5-inch screen devices. This phone is very compact, which I like. And as you can see, it's about a little bit more than 1 inch taller than the playing card and just as wide. Now as far as the dimensions go, this one comes in at a little bit less than 5 inches, so we have 4 3/4 on the height. The width we have 2.5. Now it is a little bit thicker than some of the higher end phones. This one comes in at right at 1/2. And the weight on this one, it is a little heavy for being such a small phone. It weighs almost 5 ounces, comes in at 4.85. Now as far as the Android stuff goes on this, or before I get to that, let's look at the design on this phone. It is pretty straightforward. There's nothing super fancy about it. These are capacitive touch buttons. They are not backlit, as you can see, but they are capacitive touch, and as you can see, they've changed the design. The ones I've seen with these icons have been 5.0 phones, Android 5.0 phones. Of course, here's the traditional, and here's this one. So they did change that. And other than that, everything is pretty typical in terms of location. Here's the volume. Here's the power/lock. Here's your headphone jack. And then at the bottom is the charge port. The back has a slight rubberized texture to it. And there's your camera and your LED flash. Other than that, there's nothing particularly special about the design. It is all plastic, so the screen is plastic. And I will say that this screen, which doesn't surprise me, does have a little bit of that extra drag feeling to it when you do something like this, when you swipe. And that's pretty typical on some of these lower end phones, these entry-level phones with plastic screens. So they always have a little bit. This one's not too bad. I've had worse. I've tested worse, but it does have a slight resistance to it. Now, as far as the Android stuff goes, everything here is pretty standard. You do get an FM radio as a little extra, and you do have a couple of these extra little things that are provided by Alcatel, which I call bloatware, I guess is what everybody calls those. But other than that, all the standard Android stuff is here. So you have the Play Store, Chrome, Gmail, Maps, etc., etc. Now, one of the disappointing things about this phone, which I'll show you now, and that's usually typical on these low or smaller screen phones, and that's the video quality. While it's not terrible, unless you're looking at it dead on, You can't notice it in the video, but if you look at it at even the slightest of angles, especially when you go kind of side to side, it does become very dark and difficult to see. So right now, if I look at the screen, I don't see anything whatsoever. It's totally black, though I do see that it does show up on the video. So do keep that in mind, and that's the fact that the screen or the video quality isn't the best on this phone. Also, the sound quality isn't the best. It's a bit of a tin can sound to it. There's a speaker, not terribly big, so that's not too surprising. Now, another place where that darkening shows up, and that's on games. That said, it does perform well. You can play just about any game on this thing. It does have, you know, the 1.2 quad-core processor, so you can play whatever games you want on this. But do be aware that, again, unless you're looking at it dead on, you do get a little bit of a darkening on the video there. Now there's the Play Store. Of course, you can download any freebie you'd like, as well as paid apps. You will need a Google account for that, of course. Next, we'll look at the maps. And this phone doesn't have any issues performance-wise on maps. Some of the lower quality phones have a tendency to kind of have a bit of a lag when you do stuff like this, but this phone has no problems with that whatsoever. So this phone performs really well considering the price. So the one thing I do like about this phone, that I really like actually, is the camera. And that's because it's got a lot of those cool little extras that aren't always available on these kind of entry-level phones. It is 5 megapixels, so you'll get some decent pictures out of it, or some pretty good pictures out of it. But it does have a lot of these cool little filters that are available. So, for example, you have you know, night, sport, panorama, HDR, and then when you do filters, you have all these cool little filters here, which shows you a preview of what the picture is going to look like. So I really do like all the little extras in the camera there. So I would say that the camera is one of the highlights on this phone. And then lastly, we'll show you the phone dialer and the texting interface. Here's the phone dialer, which is pretty typical Android. And here's the texting interface, which brings me to another thing that's kind of cool on this phone. And that's when you set it up, you can set it up with either swipe or standard Google keyboard. I didn't try the standard Google keyboard, but I did try the swipe one, and I think what's cool about the swipe one, while I don't do the whole swipe thing, I like the fact that when you tap a key, it turns orange, so you know exactly which key you're typing, and it makes it really easy to text and see when you make mistakes. So I really do think that this is actually a very easy phone to text with, even though it's smaller. Now the key size aren't too bad. Even when it's in portrait, I don't have a hard time texting with this phone whatsoever. So I think that about wraps this video up. I would say that this phone is well worth the $79.99 they're charging for it. It performs well. The specs are pretty good. The only thing I would say that are a bit of a downer is the video quality and the sound quality. But other than that, everything on this phone performed really well for me, and I really did like it. And I would recommend it if you're looking for an entry-level LTE device for under $100.